Hi, I'm Brendia Miller, just a girl who feels like she barely survived from being 18 to 29, from an abusive marriage to divorce, pregnant with my sweet girl to the mom of an angel, and this was all before I was even 20. Since then, I married the high school sweetheart, had a sweet boy, wrote a few books, blogs, and in 9 years, 3 states, 4 cities, 13 homes, 2 hotels, 1 angel girl, 1 sweet boy, a bunch of jobs, and an insane amount of love and laughter. Here I am, 30 years old, talking to you, sharing my wisdom from the infinite lessons I have learned while still learning to navigate around the things that I haven't. Come along and navigate with me. There is room here for your joy, your grief, your hormones, your emotions, your friendships, relationships, heartbreak, and all of the other things that come along with being in your 30s. Welcome back to the In Your 30s podcast with your host, Brandia Miller. Welcome back, 30-something gang. Today we're going to delve into the world of real estate and land investment across the U.S. I'm your host, Brandia Miller, and we're going to talk about a topic that has me so excited for the generational wealth that I am building for my family. This is owner financing options for buying land. Now, whether you're a first-time buyer or a seasoned investor, understanding owner financing can really open up new avenues for acquiring land. So today we're going to discuss the benefits, the risks, and some key things to kind of look out for. So let's chat. So first things first, let's define owner financing. Owner financing is also known as seller financing, and it's when the seller of the property acts as the lender. For example, I go and I buy a big plot of land. I have paid for it. It's done. And now I want to sell it off. I can find people myself and I can offer them payment arrangements instead of them having to go a traditional mortgage route. Because oftentimes when you're buying land that has no improvements, it's actually harder to get a traditional mortgage. And sometimes banks have limits. So when we were in North Carolina, we were looking at land and they would not give you a loan for anything less than $50,000. But the land we were looking at was like a fifth of that. So we didn't really want to take out a $50,000 loan for a $10,000 acre of land. It didn't make sense for us. But a lot of times you can find developers, companies, or even individuals who will allow you to put down a down payment and to make regular monthly payments. Now, oftentimes you will be charged some fees and some interest, but usually you can get away with this for a really, really low down payment. And this is about to be a game changer, you guys. A lot of the time, you can find companies that will do it without a credit check. How do I know? Because I own almost 50 acres of land across the U.S. and none of it is directly tied to my credit. However, I have valid contracts depicting the sale of that land and outlining all of the details. So if you are like me, I do not value the idea of credit. I don't build my credit. I cannot pay cash for it or cannot make a contract payment arrangement, then I'm not interested. I'm just going to be honest. I'm really not. And so to me, if you're like that or if you've messed up your credit, this is a great way to grab some acres. You can build a house. You can hold it for an investment. You can do whatever you need to with it and not tie up your credit, which will in turn not tie up your debt to income ratio because you don't actually ever have to report these payments. It's like if you're making a payment at Aaron's. Um, and so it leaves you a lot more freedom, as well as there's usually not a limit. So most companies may make you put down a bigger down payment or duplicate down payment for each tract, but there's not normally a limit. You could buy 10 tracts of land if they have it. And then in 2 months, if your car breaks down and you need to go buy a new car, you can still do that because your credit is not being affected in most cases. Now, with that being said, there are times and there are people, there are companies that will prefer to do a credit check, and they will only lend to you if you are in an approved category of credit by their standards. Now, like I said, if you're in a credit situation where you don't really care to build your credit, or you don't want things on your credit, or you've screwed your credit up in the past and you really still want to build this wealth, understand that that is one of the things that makes this attractive to buyers, but it's generally not even the most impressive benefit. So we're going to talk about the benefits for the buyer. We're going to talk about the benefits for the seller as well. We're going to talk about all of it, but I want you guys to understand that yes, there not being a credit check sometimes can be a great benefit, but it's definitely not the only one that makes this a superior option to a traditional mortgage situation. Easier qualification, great. Flexible terms, that one is great because you can generally do more or less years. You can pay it off early. It can help you save in like interest rates. Now, that is something that also ends up being a con, and we'll talk about that later. But your repayment schedules are semi-flexible, and most companies will work with you on all of that. Literally, they'll work with you on every single aspect of you paying off your land. Now, this is something that really, really made me like super excited. Faster closing process. If you go through a traditional mortgage, you're going to have quite a long closing process generally. And even if you don't have like the traditional, I think it's like 30 days or so, it could still be 14 days, 20 days. There can be things that push it back. There's a whole lot of the technicalities that come into play in closing that can prevent you from getting access to your land quicker and more sufficiently. When you do owner financing, generally you have immediate access to the land. So the moment the ink dries on the paper, you can go do whatever you want with your land. Let me rephrase that. You can go do whatever you want with your land within whatever the guidelines are for your contract, as well as the state and county you live in. But you can take possession of your new land immediately. And so I think that is one of my favorite benefits. And then on top of that, you're building equity. As you're making your payments, you're building equity in the property, often without the same level of scrutiny and paperwork required by traditional lenders. And let's not forget about the fact that improving land, even just clearing a plot of land, can raise its value significantly. So you could be adding a lot of value to this plot of land just by going, buying it, clearing it, and keeping it well kept and maintained. You can sit on it as an investment that is going to continue to grow, because it's not often that land loses value. Land typically grows in value, and as the world continues to become populated and people continue to want to move further out, that land that right now is really good and cheap but looks like complete crap, needs a little work, needs a cleanup, it's going to grow in value over time specifically. And in 30 years, it could be worth quite a bit more, especially when improvements are made to the land in the area. Now, as a buyer, this sounds like you're getting the best end of the deal, but honestly, we're really doing sellers a favor. And that sounds ridiculous, but there's so many benefits to a seller as well for offering owner financing solutions. And one of those is a larger pool of buyers. You know, like I said, people who are in tougher credit situations or tougher financing situations where they can't put 20% down on a house or land. You know, they need a really low down payment. It opens up the pool for them to come in and get their feet wet, you know, and that is so nice because truly, honestly, everybody should have the opportunity to own land. So by offering financing themselves, sellers can attract buyers who might not be able to secure traditional financing, increasing the chances of selling the property more quickly. And that's one thing I have noticed. There are so many companies out there, and their properties on their websites sell so fast because they're offering no credit, low down payments, and owner financing with a land sale contract that gives you immediate access, and you can do everything online. You don't even have to go to the office. Now, one thing about it is this also creates a steady income for the seller. It creates a steady debt for the buyer, but it creates a steady income for the seller. So instead of receiving a lump sum, sellers can receive regular payments every month, a little bit of interest or the fees or whatever, creating a steady income that can be pretty lucrative, especially when you consider what the cost of interest could be. Because that, like I said before, that's going to be a con for buyers in some cases. But to me, it's worth it. The extra interest would be worth it for all the benefits. Now, another thing for sellers, they can often command a little bit of a higher price for the property when offering financing because of the added value and flexibility provided to the buyer. Like I said, that little bit higher interest is really honestly worth it to me to be able to pay $250 a month. That's what I pay for one of my pieces of property. I pay $250 a month and I put $1,000 down. I have only put 1,000, 240, 300 because there was a $50 fee. So I've put down like $1,300 or something like that. That's it. And I own almost 50 acres of land. So to me, it's worth it. Sorry, I had to do the math there, but to me, it's worth it because I do get that immediate access. I don't have to go and see it. So we haven't seen our Texas or Colorado lots in person. But we also did the same thing with our Tennessee lot. We hadn't seen it in person until we moved here. Actually, it took us like 2 weeks after we moved here to even be able to get up there. If we're being honest. And that's where due diligence as a buyer comes in, and we'll talk about that later too. But like I said, there's a lot of flexibility, and to me it's worth it. It may not be to you, but it offers the seller a little more money for their property because they are having to wait on the payments. It's not the same thing as if you got a traditional loan. They get paid at closing and then you make the payments to the bank. So either way, you're going to get charged interest. Which would you rather? The flexibility of a person or a company, or the requirements and legalities of the bank? And then there can be tax advantages. Spreading out the capital gains over several years can result in lower annual taxes for the seller, which that's great. That is awesome for them. But if you are looking at doing this as a seller, make sure that you look at federal and your state tax advantages as sellers and how all that would work, because every state has their own taxes and tax process, and counties and all of that all have their own tax processes. So definitely check into the specific state that the land is in and that you file in, and the laws and all of that. Now, you're listening to this and you're thinking, this sounds like a scam. This has to be. And I thought it was too, until I actually spoke to people who have done it successfully. They own deeds. Like, I've looked up their properties. You can do that in a lot of cases, just to let you know. But I've actually looked up their properties to make sure that they were telling me the truth and they weren't just advocating for this company they thought was great, or, this company that they know that their friend owns or something like that. And these people truly outright own their land. And you can pay cash a lot of times with these companies and get discounts. That's also another benefit. But if you're thinking this is a scam, what's the risk? Why are they offering this? This sounds too good to be true. It's not always, but there are some risks. For the buyers, for the sellers, there's always a risk for anyone involved. So let's talk about that too, because I think it's important when you go into a situation to kind of be fully educated. And this is not a full education. This is truly a general education. But now you kind of know what direction to look for a full education based on your situation, your state, the land, the company, all of that. So a couple of the risks for buyers specifically: you are going to probably pay higher interest rates. I don't even know what my interest rates are on my land. I honestly didn't even look. I didn't care, because I knew what the payment was going to be regardless of the interest, and I knew the term, and that's all that mattered to me. Because for me, I'm doing so to be self-sufficient and have our own land, but also to have investment properties and things to pass down to our son. And so I know what my monthly amount is that I can spend, and then I know oftentimes what I do is I make extra on my payments. I'll round it up. So my payment, that's $250, I normally pay $300. And it just puts more on my principal, and it lowers the term that I'm going to have to pay for this piece of property. And there are times where I'll go and I'll be like, hey, let's drop a chunk of change on this land to kind of knock down some of that cost. So the other month we made 2 payments, and they were both at $300. So one of them was regular, one of them was just an extra. But for me, the interest rate doesn't matter as much, because I like all the other benefits, and I know what I can afford each month, and I know how much total I can afford in land. I have not hit my monthly budget for land payments, but I will say that right now I own almost 50 acres of land, which I've said before, but I'm very proud of it, so I'm going to keep saying it like that. But I own almost 50 acres of land, and I paid less than I did for rent in North Carolina. So if that tells you anything, I mean, and that's rounding it up. That's rounding all my payments up to the next 100. So if that tells you anything, that's why I don't care. I just do not care about the interest rate at this point. Another risk for buyers is balloon payments. This is something that I would definitely make sure that you're very clear about in the beginning, and very, very clear about your contract. If there's anything in your contract that you do not understand, correspond with the company in an email and ask. And also, you can consult a real estate lawyer to look over it and explain the terminology, because some companies use real estate terminology and some companies use very simple very basic contracts. And I work with 2 different companies right now. Sorry, my nose was itching. I work with 2 different companies right now, and one of them has a very real estate terminology contract. And I thank God every day for the education that I do have in real estate, because it made it easier to understand. One of them has a very, very easy contract. It's like a couple pages. It's very simple. This is your payment. This is when it's due. This is how long you have to make it for like your grace period. This is what we do if you don't make it. This is what we do if you don't make it again. This is when we take your land. Everything on the land that has been improved to the land is ours once we take possession of it again. If you fail to make payments, you will be evicted immediately, basically, from the land. And that's it. And it's so simple. But some people use real estate terminology. So if you don't know what a balloon payment is a large payment at the end of the term. And most of the time, what it'll be is owner financing. You put 5% down, then you pay so much a month. This is usually not something a lot of companies do. This is people. But, and then what they'll do is they'll say, for 5 years you pay this much, and then at the end of that 5 years you pay the rest of the balance. And it can really be a challenge if you're not prepared for it, if you're not aware that there's going to be that payment. So just be very careful about the contracts, the terminology, be very clear, and look out for little things like that. That balloon payment at the end can really, really get you. And it can cost you years of making consistent payments and building equity in this land and improving upon it and investing in it. And I thankfully am not working with companies that do that, but it would be absolutely terribly heartbreaking to spend 15 years paying for a piece of property and improving on it and building a legacy on it, to find out that I have to pay an outrageous payment and they usually are quite outrageous. It's like the lump sum of $80,000 is due. It's not usually something you get, just willy-nilly got in the bank. And so, to me, it would be terribly heartbreaking. Just watch out for those things. Those are the things that make people feel like this is a scam, when in reality, it's not. Now, another thing is to ensure that the title is clear title. You want to make sure that the title is issued to the seller. It's clear. There's no liens. There's not going to be any legal issues down the road, because generally on owner financing you can't get title insurance. So if anything does come up, you just lose your money, because most of the time that person's not going to give you your money back. And you can take it to court, but honestly, that's up in the air, because our judicial system is insane. So who knows if you would even win there, to be honest. So this is something that you really should do no matter what route you go through with real estate. Do your due diligence. Due diligence. There we go. Because if you do your due diligence properly, you're going to know that that title is secure and it is clear and the company owns it or the person owns it. And, you're going to have all the information, and you can go and you can have a real estate lawyer do a chain of, what is it? Oh man, chain of title, I think is what it's called in North Carolina. But anyways, it's probably called different things in different states. Basically, they make sure that there is a clear chain of title and that person does have a clear title. There's not going to be any misunderstandings where anyone can come and say, hey, I actually am supposed to own this property. They basically stole it from me. They never had the rights to it. Which can happen in a lot of cases if you're not sure that the title is a clear title and there is a clear chain of title and they know who owned it, who sold it, who owned it, who sold it, who owned it, who sold it. And no one can say that they did not properly sign over their interest in this piece of property. Now, one thing that I will say is do not jump into owner financing if you're not going to be able to make your payments. Because if you put a house on that piece of property, it's no longer yours. It has now become real property in most states. And you can't just pick it up and take it with you. So don't waste your time, don't waste your energy, and don't put yourself in an unstable situation just trying to own acreage. Know that you can afford it. Know that you have the means to do so, to sit on it, to do whatever it is you need to do with it in the meantime without putting yourself in a bind. Now, with that said, there are some risks for sellers, and I'm sure that it's hard to see how, but there are. So, buyers can default on owner financing land, and because most of the time it's not set to your credit, it doesn't affect you. And so a lot of people will default on their land, and then they can go to another company, or they can even sometimes go back to that company and get another piece of land, which sounds great to a buyer, for the seller anyway, because it sounds like they can sell the piece of land over and over again, which they can, which is why I say do not jump into it if you're not responsible. But it's also time consuming and can be very costly because the seller could have to go through a full foreclosure process. Even though in some states it's only on a contract, it is a piece of land. People might be living there. There might be an improvement there. Who knows? So if you're thinking about doing this as a seller, be prepared for the fact that you could have to foreclose. You could have to provide an eviction in case of a buyer default. Now, another thing is you're going to be responsible for the collection of the payments because you're the bank, you're the seller, you're all of the things. So you're going to need to be able to manage the payments and the collections. And if you're doing this throughout multiple states, you're going to need to be able to keep up with those state and county laws depicting the taxes, recording the payments that you receive, and just any issues that may arise. Now, a lot of times when you do owner financing, it is an as-is situation. So if an issue arises with the property, depending on what the issue is, the company may rectify it, they may not. If it's an issue on their end, there's usually a clause that says that they will rectify it and what issues they will rectify. However, most issues they do not rectify, and that is the key to understanding. It's owner financing. So once you take possession, it's your property, your problem, you have to deal with that. Or if you later on find out that the property will not work for what you need, you kind of just lose out in most cases. There are companies, one of the companies I work with is really good about if something happens that is not beyond their control, they will work out a situation to help you find a different property that does fit. So I love that, and I definitely would want to work with a company like that. But there's a lot of management responsibility. There's a lot of needing to collect payments, needing to make sure taxes get paid, needing to make sure that liens stay off the property, needing to make sure, just so many things that you're responsible for as a seller. And then another risk to the seller is, again, whatever the buyer does to the property, you're stuck with. So, where the buyer, if they put a house on the property and they lose it, they lose a house. If the buyer puts a bunch of broke down vehicles on the property and they don't make the payments, you're stuck with the cleanup of these broke down vehicles and figuring out what to do with them. Because oftentimes situations like that can decrease the value or make it hard to find a buyer. When we bought our land, we first went up there. There was a sleeping bag. There was some trash up there. It was not a very attractive site, but we seen the beauty in the land, so it was done. The contract was signed. We were happy with it. It didn't matter. But had we seen it beforehand with that, or had it been something that would have taken a lot of time and work and effort to rectify ourselves, I probably would have passed. And so that makes it hard for sellers, because with the owner financing and a lot of times where this land is located, you can end up with a lot of crap to clean up, just honest to God. Now, when considering owner financing, there are some key things to really look out for, and this really can apply to both parties. So honestly, it's not buyer or seller advice. It's just real estate common sense advice. So one thing is, and I mentioned this before, contracts. Make sure the agreement is clear. Make sure both parties understand when payments are, what the down payment is, when it's due, when the deed will be assigned. Literally, there's so many things, and I truly advise that as a buyer, you hire a lawyer. But if you cannot afford or do not want to do that, at least see if you can find one that will look over your contract and explain terminology to you that you don't understand for a low cost. You might even be able to hire a law student just for the explanation of terminology. However, I'm not sure if that would constitute practicing law, so I'm not sure if they would actually do that. But just make sure everything is written out. Everything is written out. Nothing can be verbal. It needs to all be written out. All the terms, all the conditions, all the dates, all the payment schedules, the interest rates. What happens in the case of default? What are the options if you fail to make your payment on time? What are the repercussions? How long do you have? All of that stuff. Make sure everything is in writing, because most places do not value a verbal agreement, and most court systems will not uphold a verbal agreement without proof of said verbal agreement. So get it in writing. Just get it in writing. Just get it in writing. Just get it in writing. If you think you need it in writing, get it in writing. If you think that you could need it in writing in 5, 10, 15 years, if anything goes wrong, get it in writing. No matter how nice they are, get it in writing. Get it in writing. Buyer, seller, get it in writing. Another consideration, again, is professional advice. Consult with a real estate attorney or a financial advisor. You can help ensure that the agreement is fair and legally sound this way. You can help make sure that you understand your part and their part, and that way you know if they're actually upholding their part, because how do you know? How do you know if you don't actually know what their part is supposed to be? Being a buyer, being a seller, you still have to understand each part of the contract and whose part is what, and if it ever needs enforced, be able to enforce that. Knowing that is the first step. Now, as a buyer, this is literally one of the most important things, and I keep saying it. I'm going to keep saying it. Due diligence. Due diligence. Due diligence. Ask every question, even when you think it's stupid, even when you think it's pointless, even if it's listed in the listing. Ask them anyways to make sure. Ask everything. Get a title search. Make sure they have a clear title and that they actually own it, even if it's a company. Land surveys. These are very important, because this is going to outline the property lines. This is going to tell you where your property begins and ends. This is going to tell you about what space and what area you can build, because some places you have setbacks. There are different things that this can tell you, and these are very important. And then one of the biggest things about doing your due diligence as a buyer is understanding zoning laws and restrictions that might affect the property's use. Now, I say this very importantly because a lot of the times companies will advertise land as unrestricted. And it's important to know that in a lot of cases, unrestricted land to the company means they have not added their own restrictions to that land. It does not mean necessarily that that land is fully unrestricted. And honestly, with all the laws and things that multiple different governments do to regulate water and electricity, in a lot of cases, there's already restrictions on deeds. Just because counties and cities put their own restrictions on the area and the zoning, and they can have their own restrictions on certain areas based off of the size of the property. They can have restrictions that are based off of basically like anything they want, really, realistically. And so it's very important to check with the city, the county, and the state to make sure that there's no restrictions that might affect the way you use that property. And this is across the board. If you're wanting to start a home business or homestead or just build a house, if you want to have chickens, even, there are states that don't allow roosters, or maybe it's not states, maybe it's counties or cities or something, but either way, they don't allow roosters because they're too loud. So make sure that you do your due diligence, you check into all of that stuff, because you could buy it with the idea that you're going to open a hatchery and you can't even have roosters. So who's going to fertilize the eggs? I mean, these are things that are very important to think about ahead of time and really do your research. Most land records are public and they're very easy to get access to. If you can't search them online, there are some places that you can't, believe it or not. But if you can't search them online, usually you can email or call and they'll be happy to help you with whatever it is that you need, as long as they can. Now, another thing to consider is using a third-party escrow service to handle the payments so that the seller and the buyer can both feel a little more security, and there's accountability for both parties. You don't have to be a real estate agent or a mortgage lender to contact an escrow service and use their services. This is something that you most definitely can do as a buyer to feel a little more secure, because let's face it, people will cheat you. And if it is person to person, you're more likely to fall into a scam or get cheated if the documentation is not done correctly the whole process through. There are so many things that you really need to look at with owner financing, but owner financing can be such a fantastic tool for both buyers and sellers when it's used correctly. It offers flexibility, we have faster transactions, and it can open up opportunities that might otherwise be unavailable. Especially in this economy, people are struggling to put food on their table. They don't have money for 20% down. It's just not always possible. And a lot of people are searching for a way to have family compounds or be self-sufficient, and this is a great way to do so. And a lot of these properties are usually in more secluded areas, so you get that added comfort and peace. Let's be real about it. It's so nice and quiet where we are moving to. Honestly, it's the most peaceful place on earth. However, with that being said, it's very crucial to understand that there are risks, and you need to understand the risks, and you need to take all of the necessary precautions to protect yourself and your investment. This is your time. This is your money. This is your family's generational wealth. This is your legacy, and you need to be careful. You need to protect it, and don't be trusting with anybody when it comes to your investment. Thank you for tuning in to the In Your 30s podcast. I hope this episode has given you valuable insights to owner financing options for buying land all across the U.S. You know, we have done this in Tennessee, Texas, Colorado. If anyone knows of a piece of property in Maine, that's like my dream, but it has to be like waterfront. It's got to be very specific. But regardless, at this point, we have done this in couple of states, and I know people who have successfully done this in multiple states, and I think that it needs to be discussed more and talked about more, but definitely don't jump into it blind. Go into it with a lot of preparation. So if you have any questions or topics that you would like for us to cover, feel free to reach out. Until next time, happy land hunting. I know I will be. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, follow us on social media, and for the latest updates and episodes. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, 30-something gang.